the summer of 1903, workers renovating the long-abandoned Ravenshollow Manor in Clarksville, Tennessee, unearthed a discovery that froze their blood. Just 3 feet beneath the stone foundation, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed inside a rusted metal box, were 47 photographs capturing one of the most brutal family murders in post-Civil War America. These were not police records, but something far more disturbing, a photographic confession of revenge so meticulous it took 27 years for anyone to understand what happened to the Holloway family on the night of October 13, 1876. The images revealed everything, from cruel humiliations to savage beatings, culminating in 5 machete strikes delivered in the dead of night. Most shocking of all, the photos showed that the killer had forced Cornelius Holloway, the family patriarch, obsessed with documenting power, through the lens to photograph his own family's execution, 1 frame at a time. What investigators asked in 1903 was not only who killed the Holloways, but why someone felt compelled to preserve each moment with the same care Cornelius once used to capture the suffering of others. Clarksville in 1876 was a town balanced on the edge of change. The old plantation elite clung to faded power, while freedmen and poor whites struggled to rebuild lives in the aftermath of war. The Cumberland River cut through tobacco fields that had once thrived on bondage, now worked under uneasy conditions by former masters and the formerly enslaved. At the center of this tension stood Ravenshollow Manor, a grand 3-story Georgian estate overlooking nearly 2,000 acres of Tennessee farmland. Built in 1834 by tobacco magnate Jeremiah Holloway, it survived the war intact thanks to his careful shifting of loyalties when Union forces moved in. By 1876, the estate was run by Jeremiah's son, Cornelius Holloway, whose 2 obsessions would ultimately doom his family. His first was photography, a new art that fascinated him for its ability to trap time. He turned an entire basement wing into a state-of-the-art darkroom, producing portraits for the wealthy, but preferring candid images of street-life field workers and what he called anthropological studies. His second passion was far darker. Unlike his father, remembered as a mild master by antebellum standards, Cornelius reveled in control, humiliation, and punishment, inflicting his will on black and white laborers alike. The Holloway household in 1876 reflected his corruption. Cornelius's wife, Margaret, descended from Nashville high society, spent much of her life in laudanum haze. Their eldest son, Edwin, 28, shared his father's cruelty, but lacked his cunning. Caroline, 25, used her sharp wit for social torment, delighting in others' discomfort. The youngest, Thomas, 22, returned from Vanderbilt with progressive ideas about labor, but his convictions dissolved in the shadow of his family's power. Together they embodied the toxic mix of privilege, cruelty, and fear that set the stage for the night history tried to bury until the photographs brought it back into the light. By 1876, Ravenshollow Manor employed nearly 60 people, a mix of sharecroppers, day laborers, and domestic staff living in sagging cabins scattered across the grounds. Most were former slaves bound not by chains, but by debt locked into a system that resembled slavery in everything but name. The Holloways enforced this dependence with economic traps, social pressure, and when that failed, outright violence. At the center of it all stood Ezekiel Hayes, the plantation's foreman since 1869. Tall, soft-spoken, and respected, Hayes could read and write, a rarity that made him indispensable to Cornelius Holloway, and in some ways, dangerous. Rumors swirled that Hayes was saving money to buy his own farm, a dream he pursued quietly, while hiding a far more subversive skill. In his youth, he had apprenticed briefly with a traveling photographer, learning how to operate cameras and develop prints. He kept this knowledge secret instinctively, understanding that in Reconstruction-era Tennessee, information could be more powerful than wealth. By the fall of 1876, Ravenshollow simmered with unrest. Bad weather had ruined much of the tobacco crop, profits were falling, and Cornelius's cruelty intensified. Families who tried to leave were told their debts chained them to the land. Those who resisted were beaten publicly, their suffering preserved by Cornelius's lens as what he called deterrent documentation. He even sold copies of the most degrading images to fellow landowners, turning humiliation into profit and entertainment. On the morning of October 13th, a crisp autumn chill clung to the estate. Margaret Holloway retreated to her chamber, lost once again in laudanum haze. Edwin rode out before dawn to investigate rumored sabotage in the distant fields. Caroline entertained a friend from Nashville, spinning tales of elegance that masked the family's cruelty. Thomas wrestled with letters in the library, his conscience increasingly at odds with his father's methods. Cornelius himself was in unusually high spirits. Humming as he readied his camera, he boasted of a plan to catch a group of workers meeting secretly in a tobacco barn. He would photograph their conspiracy, proof of his authority, captured frame by frame. But his ambush had already been compromised. Ezekiel Hayes, with a quiet intelligence Cornelius never bothered to notice, had built a network of informants among the household staff. Sarah Hutchkins, who cleaned the darkroom, had whispered of the horrors Cornelius developed there. Images not only of punishment, but of degradation, arranged and savored like trophies. Hayes had pieced together the truth. Cornelius wasn't just enforcing control. He was profiting from pain, feeding the appetites of other plantation owners who delighted in such cruelty. At 2:30 that afternoon, Cornelius entered the barn with two hired enforcers, camera in hand, expecting fear. Instead, he found Hayes and a dozen others waiting calmly in the center of the room. Mr. Holloway, Hayes said softly, his voice steady. I think it's time we had a conversation about respect. Cornelius smirked, raising his camera like a weapon. The only conversation, Ezekiel, will be the one these photographs have with anyone else foolish enough to organize against me. That was when Hayes revealed his own camera, crude but functional, built from discarded parts and months of quiet observation. In that moment, power shifted. Cornelius had come to capture defiance. Instead, he faced the lens of the man he believed he owned. Funny thing about photographs, Mr. Holloway, Hayes said quietly, his tone steady and almost casual. They tell the truth whether we want them to or not. And I've been recording truths of my own. What unfolded that afternoon in the tobacco barn would only be pieced together 27 years later when the buried photographs finally surfaced. Hayes had not acted on impulse. For nearly 2 years, he had been building a secret archive, an unflinching record of the Holloway family's brutality. Every beating, every calculated humiliation, every act of psychological torment was preserved through hidden lenses and perfect timing. But Hayes's intent was never just to build a case. It was to orchestrate justice on his own terms. The photographs discovered in 1903 revealed that the events in the barn were not an eruption of chaos, but the beginning of a campaign planned with surgical precision. Hayes and his allies overpowered Cornelius and his hired men, then forced the patriarch to become the unwilling chronicler of his own downfall. The camera he once used to enforce fear would now capture the unraveling of his family. The first sign that something was wrong at Ravenshollow came when Edwin failed to return from the far fields by nightfall. Caroline grew restless, her irritation born less from worry than from the social inconvenience of her brother's absence. Her Nashville guest had been promised a proper introduction to the entire family. Thomas tried to organize a search, but found most of the workers had mysteriously vanished. The servants who lingered in the halls moved with an odd charged energy, exchanging glances that suggested they knew far more than they dared to say. Margaret emerged from her room for the first time in 2 days. Pale and trembling, muttering about nightmares filled with the rhythmic snapping of camera shutters that blended with the thud of chopping wood. Her family dismissed the visions as laudanum delirium, but the servant's eyes betrayed recognition, as though her subconscious had caught echoes of something real. By nightfall, the atmosphere in the mansion thickened. Fires roared in the hearths, yet the house felt cold, each room heavy with an unseen presence. Caroline's guest, unnerved by the tension, abruptly announced she would depart in the morning. Citing family obligations in Nashville, no one believed. It was near 10 o'clock when the first sound came, a metallic clicking, sharp and deliberate. Caroline, startled, assumed it was a clock in need of winding. But the rhythm was wrong, irregular, and carried through the walls from outside. Thomas, ever the rational one, suggested it might be a piece of farm equipment left running. He moved to open the front door, hand on the iron handle when the clicking stopped dead, replaced by a silence far more menacing than the noise itself. What they could not see was that Hayes and his conspirators had been encircling the manor for hours. Their movements calculated, their knowledge of the grounds absolute. Cameras had been hidden in the shadows, lenses trained on every possible escape, documenting not just the Holloway's fear, but their downfall frame by merciless frame. The clicking outside was not random. It was the synchronized operation of multiple hidden cameras. Each snap captured the Holloway's growing unease from different angles, later revealing how completely surrounded and powerless they had been. The photographs unearthed in 1903 proved this night was not about murder alone, but about constructing terror with the same cold precision the Holloways had once inflicted on others. Hayes had studied his enemies the way Cornelius once studied light and shadow. Caroline, terrified of social disgrace, was undone by letters Hayes had already sent to her Nashville acquaintances, exposing the Holloway's cruelty and ensuring her reputation would collapse even if her body survived. Thomas, consumed by fear of inadequacy, found himself framed for embezzling from his father's accounts false evidence meticulously planted to ruin his future and leave his education meaningless. Margaret's torment was more intimate. Hayes had secretly replaced her laudanum with a harmless substitute, condemning her to wrenching withdrawal, while surrounding her with photographs documenting her decline in secret. But Cornelius was reserved for the cruelest fate. His life's pride, photography itself, was turned into a weapon against him. Hayes's plan, as revealed in the recovered images, forced Cornelius to become the unwilling chronicler of his family's destruction, documenting their final hours as carefully as he once recorded the suffering of his laborers. By midnight on October 13th, the Holloways huddled in the parlor, pretending control, while privately admitting they were trapped. The servants had vanished, leaving the family alone in their violated home. Caroline noticed first her jewelry box had been rifled through, not for theft, but arranged and photographed. Thomas discovered his father's study had been subjected to the same treatment papers photographed in place, then returned with meticulous care. The intruders weren't looting. They were cataloging. Margaret's discovery was the most horrific. In her chamber lay a collection of photographs showing her in drug-induced stupors, images captured over months without her knowledge documenting her weakness like a scientific study. Then came the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, confident. Not the hurried steps of a visitor, but the measured pace of men who already owned the night. Thomas called through the locked door. "Who's there? What do you want?" Hayes's reply was calm, chilling in its finality. "Mr. Thomas, your family has something that belongs to us. We've come to collect what's owed." Caroline's voice shook as she answered. "Our accounts are settled, Ezekiel. Father has always been fair." The silence that followed was broken only by Hayes's steady reply. "Miss Caroline, I'm not talking about money." Outside movement encircled the manor, boots crunching gravel porch boards, groaning, and beneath it all, the ceaseless clicking of cameras. Then came another sound. Cornelius's voice, muffled and ragged, carrying both rage and terror. Whatever power he once held was gone. Margaret began to weep, her trembling hands pressed to her face. "They're going to kill us," she whispered. "They're going to kill us all." Thomas tried to rally the family with hollow words about law and consequence. "This is still Tennessee. There are laws. There will be punishment." Hayes's voice floated back through the window, soft and merciless. "Yes, Mr. Thomas, there are consequences, and after 7 years of watching your family break every law of human decency, it's time you experience them." Then Edwin's voice joined in, thin and strained, like a man reciting words not his own. "They want Father to come outside," he said haltingly. "They have photographs, evidence, proof of what he's done." Caroline rushed to the curtains, but could see nothing in the dark except shifting shapes. "Edwin, are you hurt? What do they want from us?" His reply was sharper, steadier now, as though speaking the truth gave him strength. "They want justice, Caroline. They want Father to see what he's created, and they want him to document it the same way he documented everything else." In that instant, the family began to understand. Hayes had not come simply to kill. He had come to make Cornelius Holloway the unwilling author of his own legacy, a photographic confession of everything he had tried to hide. This was never intended to be a simple act of revenge. Hayes's plan was an inversion of power itself. Cornelius would become the photographer forced to record his family's helpless terror, just as he had once documented the suffering of others. Desperate to break the stalemate, Thomas called out through the door. "Ezekiel, if there are grievances, we can settle them like civilized men. There's no need for threats." Hayes's reply was calm, almost weary. "Your family stopped treating us like civilized men a long time ago. Tonight we return the courtesy. Now I need Mr. Cornelius to step outside. He has work to do." The photographs later unearthed in 1903 revealed the depth of Hayes's planning. Every element of that night had been choreographed with the precision of a darkroom process, meant not only to terrify the Holloways, but to force them to confront the truth of their own cruelty. Yet Hayes had underestimated Cornelius. He expected the patriarch to collapse under humiliation. Instead, Cornelius's response was cunning, calculated, and far more dangerous than anyone predicted. For an hour, the siege held. The family remained barricaded in the parlor, while Hayes's men encircled the house. But the prolonged tension began tearing both groups apart. Inside, Margaret's withdrawal worsened into hysteria, demanding laudanum no one could provide. Caroline's fear curdled into rage, directed at her father, whom she blamed for their predicament. And Thomas, worn down by dread, finally broke his silence. "Father's gone too far," he whispered to his sister. "I've seen the photographs in his study. We deserve this." Caroline turned on him, furious. "How dare you take their side? These people are murderers, thieves. They want to destroy everything we've built." Thomas's reply carried a quiet conviction that unsettled even him. "What we've built is rotten, Caroline. It's been rotten for years. Maybe it's time someone held us accountable." Outside, Hayes faced unrest of his own. Some of his allies grew anxious, worried that their absence might draw the attention of law enforcement. And Cornelius, ever manipulative, tried to shift the power dynamic. "Ezekiel," he called, his voice smooth, "if you want to document injustice, you must understand the craft. Light, composition, timing, these matter if your photographs are to have impact. You need my expertise." It was a sly move, an attempt to reposition himself as indispensable a teacher rather than a prisoner. Cornelius was betting that his skills could buy him leverage, perhaps even survival. But Hayes had anticipated this. He had studied not only Cornelius's work, but his psychology, and he knew the man's fatal vanity, his belief that no one could succeed without him. "Mr. Holloway," Hayes replied evenly, "you're right. Your expertise is exactly what we need tonight. But before we discuss technique, we need to talk about your subject matter. The photographs you've been taking of our people, the ones you sell in Nashville and Memphis? Images of human beings treated like animals, turned into entertainment for men like you. The accusation struck Cornelius like a blow. That secret business had been his most carefully guarded sin, shared only with a handful of wealthy clients who paid dearly for images of humiliation and suffering. He hesitated, then lied with practiced ease. I don't know what you're talking about, Ezekiel. But outside the window, the shutters clicked again. And Cornelius knew with a sick certainty that Hayes had the proof. Sir, we've seen your customer correspondence names, addresses, payment records, even requests for specific kinds of documentation. You built a business around our suffering. Hayes's words cut through the silence like a blade. Inside the parlor, the Holloway family began to unravel. Caroline, who prided herself on controlling every detail of life at Ravenshollow, realized she had been blind to an enterprise running under her nose. Thomas felt bile rise in his throat as he remembered the times his father insisted punishment sessions be photographed, claiming it was for records. Now he saw the truth. Cruelty had been monetized. Margaret, dazed and shivering in withdrawal, broke into jagged laughter. Of course, she gasped. Of course he sold them. Everything in this house is for sale. Why not our souls, too? The revelation shifted everything. Hayes had proven Cornelius wasn't merely sadistic, he was calculating turning human degradation into profit. For the family, the truth was worse than victimization. It was complicity. But Hayes wasn't finished. The recovered photographs from 1903 showed that the dawn of October 14th marked a turning point. Hayes's men began hauling camera equipment from hidden caches around the property, assembling what looked less like a guerrilla siege and more like a studio reflective surfaces. Carefully angled props, every element arranged with professional care. Hayes called out Mr. Holloway. It's time you saw your legacy in full. From the shadows came an archive of evidence so damning that even Cornelius staggered under its weight. Hayes and his team had documented not only brutality, but the very machinery of the Holloway's power. Photographs showed poisoned housing materials designed to keep workers sick and dependent, falsified scales that cheated sharecroppers out of wages, inflated supply costs that kept debt eternal. Worst of all were the wartime images, proof that the Holloways sold defective tobacco to Union buyers while secretly funneling quality goods to Confederate forces. Federal treason evidence that still carried legal weight nearly 3 decades later. Cornelius's voice cracked for the first time. How did you get these photographs? The same way you got yours? Hayes replied coolly. Patience, access, and the right equipment. The difference is, mine reveal crimes, yours glorify them. Through the window, Thomas watched hollow-eyed, recognizing his own presence in scenes of fraud and exploitation. Caroline saw herself orchestrating social humiliations that reduced families to pariahs. Even Margaret appeared photographed while providing false testimony to shield her husband's abuses. Each image stripped them bare layer by layer until no illusions remained. What do you want from us? Caroline whispered, just as Hayes answered. But not the kind you expect. Then came the sound, the clicking of multiple cameras being readied in unison. Mr. Holloway, you're going to help us create a different record. Images of what happens when the order of things shifts. When the people you called animals remember they are human beings with choices. Cornelius understood instantly. You want me to photograph my family's execution? Hayes's reply was steady, almost reverent. I want you to create a masterpiece, the culmination of your career. A record that will outlast us all. The photographs later recovered proved the unthinkable. Cornelius agreed. Confronted with inevitable death and offered the chance to craft something enduring, his pride overpowered his fear. Straightening his shoulders, he spoke with chilling resolve. "If we're going to do this," he said, regaining his old authority, "we're going to do it properly. Real artistry demands more than pointing a camera and hoping for the best." What followed was not simply an execution, but a grotesque collaboration, victim and executioner bound together by the camera. Cornelius, stripped of power, yet clinging to his art, provided technical mastery, while Hayes supplied the creative vision. Together they staged a sequence of tableaus that transformed death into documentation. Each image designed to show not only the Holloway's demise, but their forced recognition of the justice behind it. The first subject was Margaret. Years of willful blindness dulled by laudanum had left her complicit in everything that unfolded under her roof. Hayes placed her in her favorite parlor chair, arranging around her the empty bottles he had collected over months, silent witnesses to her self-destruction. Cornelius adjusted the reflectors with the precision of a society portraitist. "The light must capture the texture of her skin," he instructed. "The drug has aged her. It tells the story of complicity through decay." The recovered photograph showed not terror, but relief on Margaret's face, as though death was a release. She whispered what sounded like a prayer before Hayes ended her life, with a single deliberate cut. Caroline's staging was far more elaborate. Hayes filled the parlor with mirrors, dozens of them, creating endless reflections of the woman who had built her power on vanity and social manipulation. Scattered at her feet were letters from her Nashville acquaintances, now poisoned with the truth about her family's cruelty. "She needs to see herself," Hayes said, angling the final mirror, "to understand how others have seen her all along." Cornelius ensured every reflection was sharp, every angle merciless. When Caroline finally grasped the symbolism, her composure shattered. The photographs captured not just her death, but the instant of recognition, the moment she saw herself through the eyes of every life she had humiliated. Thomas's execution was staged in his father's study. Surrounded by fraudulent ledgers and contracts, he sat at the desk with pen in hand, as if signing his own death warrant. Hayes's cruelty was deliberate. "He always wanted to be the intellectual," he said. "Let him use that intelligence to understand what he's done." Cornelius adjusted the shadows to fall across the incriminating documents, framing them like evidence. The photographs showed Thomas reading each paper aloud, forced to confess every theft and deception before the blade fell. On the final image, Hayes scrawled Thomas's last words. "I knew it was wrong, but I was too weak to stop." But it was Edwin whose death was the most harrowing. Hayes recreated the punishment chamber Edwin himself had overseen, complete with the ropes, chains, and iron instruments once used on laborers. This time, Edwin was the subject. Each device was applied to him in turn, every humiliation mirrored back onto its author. Cornelius, coldly detached, documented the process frame by frame, as if conducting a medical study. "This is not revenge," Hayes explained, his voice flat. "This is education. He will learn what it means to endure what he inflicted." The recovered photographs of Edwin's torment were the most unsettling in the entire collection. Not just for what they revealed about him, but for what they revealed about Cornelius. A father reduced to recording his son's agony with professional precision, his eye never wavering from the lens. Edwin's screams echoed across the plantation, carrying through the fields and cabins. Yet what witnesses later recalled most was not the noise of his torment, but the silences between the eerie pauses when Cornelius calmly instructed for lamps to be shifted or cameras adjusted, ensuring each stage of the torture was perfectly framed. The most chilling photograph in the entire collection showed Edwin at the end. No longer screaming, no longer pleading, just staring directly into the lens with a look of dreadful clarity. It was as if in those final seconds, he finally understood the full measure of what he had done to others. His face bore not just agony, but the terrible weight of moral recognition. Each execution was captured with multiple cameras, professional lighting, and careful composition. The images were horrific, but undeniably artistic. And the strangest detail preserved in Hayes's notes was how fully Cornelius embraced his role. He offered technical suggestions, adjusted exposures, critiqued angles with the same zeal he once lavished on society portraits. "Art demands truth," he declared, setting up the camera for the final shots. And truth demands sacrifice. The last photographs in the sequence depicted Cornelius himself, taken by Hayes with the plantation owner's own equipment. Yet these were not images of a broken man. They showed someone who, in a grotesque way, had achieved fulfillment, a man who believed he had finally created his masterpiece, even as it recorded his own destruction. For 27 years, those photographs lay buried beneath Ravenshollow Manor. In their absence, a more convenient version of events took root. According to law enforcement and the local press, the Holloways were slain during a robbery gone wrong, murdered by disgruntled workers who fled with stolen valuables. It was a story designed to quiet unrest, to protect reputations, to avoid dangerous questions about justice in Reconstruction-era Tennessee. The sheriff, long on Cornelius's payroll, had no incentive to dig deeper. Neighboring plantation owners, some of them buyers of Cornelius's degrading photographs, were eager to accept a simple narrative that kept their own dealings hidden. No serious investigation was ever conducted. Ezekiel Hayes and his co-conspirators vanished within days, their absence dismissed as the flight of terrified laborers rather than evidence of complicity. The mansion itself stood abandoned, shunned by buyers, and whispered about as haunted. Children dared each other to approach its gates. Adults crossed themselves and walked faster on the road that ran beside it. For nearly 3 decades, Ravenshollow remained a scar in the Tennessee landscape. Then, in 1903, as railroad expansion made the land valuable, workers preparing the site uncovered the rusted metal box. Inside lay the photographs, nearly 50 in all, that stunned not only Clarksville, but the entire nation. Newspapers from New York to Chicago splashed sensational headlines about the Tennessee terror pictures. Yet the true horror was not simply in the Holloway's crimes or even the graphic record of their executions. It was in the realization that Ezekiel Hayes had created something larger than revenge. He had fashioned a work of art, an unflinching mirror that forced every viewer to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, power, and the thin line between oppressor and oppressed. Modern audiences who first saw the recovered photographs reported a strange paradox. They were unable to look away. The images were revolting in subject, yet mesmerizing in execution, their technical mastery and moral weight creating a viewing experience that was as compelling as it was horrifying. In 1904, several of the photographs were briefly displayed in a Nashville museum. Newspapers called them the most disturbing images ever created in American photography, and lines stretched for blocks as thousands of visitors waited to see them. In less than a month, nearly 10,000 people had filed past the glass cases. But after mounting protests from religious and civic leaders who claimed the pictures threatened public morals, the exhibition was shut down. Afterward, the photographs vanished from official view. Rumors persisted that copies had slipped into private collections, whispered about, but never proven. From time to time, claims surfaced that additional images or documents had been discovered, though none were ever verified. Ravenshollow Manor itself did not survive much longer. In 1905, the railroad company that purchased the land ordered the mansion demolished and the debris burned to prevent its reuse. Workers claimed to have uncovered hidden chambers and secret passageways during the demolition, hinting that the Holloway family's secrets may have reached even deeper than Hayes's camera had captured. Today the grounds hold nothing more remarkable than a switching station and freight depot with no sign that one of Tennessee's darkest stories ever unfolded there. Yet, local folklore persists. Train engineers still tell of strange clicking sounds echoing from the earth and fleeting figures with cameras glimpsed in the glare of depot lights. Beyond its horror, the case left a profound legacy. The Ravenshollow photographs demonstrated that the camera could be more than a tool of vanity or record-keeping. It could be a weapon against power, a means of documenting injustice. With an authority no testimony could match. Law enforcement soon adopted systematic photographic evidence to build cases against elites once untouchable, while reformers used the same methods to expose the hidden suffering of factory workers, child laborers, and slum dwellers. But the question that lingers is one no photograph can answer. Did Ezekiel Hayes deliver justice or merely invent a more sophisticated form of cruelty? By forcing Cornelius Holloway to document his own family's destruction with the same meticulous care he once applied to the suffering of others, Ezekiel Hayes created something that cannot be easily defined. Was it poetic justice or proof that he had simply matched his oppressor's capacity for cruelty? The truth, like the photographs themselves, lingers in a gray space beyond simple judgment. What cannot be denied is that Hayes succeeded in producing images that continued to disturb long after the world had forgotten the night that birthed them. More than a century later, the story of Ravenshollow Manor reminds us that the relationship between documentation and power is as dangerous and morally ambiguous as ever. In an age when nearly everyone carries a camera, when images can be shared instantly across the world, Hayes and Cornelius's grim collaboration feels both prophetic and unsettling. Their work stands as both a warning and an inspiration, proof that photography can expose truth, create art, and serve justice, even when that justice exacts a price society is reluctant to accept. The workers who unearthed the buried photographs in 1903 claimed they could not sleep for weeks after seeing them. They were haunted not simply by the brutality captured on film, but by the terrible realization that what they had witnessed was in its own twisted way a masterpiece, a creation born from humanity's darkest impulses. And perhaps the most chilling legacy of all is not what the photographs revealed about the Holloways, but what they suggested about the future. Hayes demonstrated that images do not merely record history, they shape it. They can turn victims into executioners, oppressors into subjects, and blur the line between justice and vengeance in ways that continue to challenge us to this day. Just when it seems the full horror of Ravenshollow has been uncovered, new details emerge, small fragments that suggest the story may be even darker than we imagined. If this tale of buried photographs and documented revenge has left you uneasy, share it with someone who appreciates history's hidden terrors. Hit the like button to support our journey into America's forgotten shadows, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that refuse to stay buried. Because, according to those who saw it before the collection disappeared, the final photograph in Ezekiel Hayes' archive showed something no one expected, and something that has never been explained. The final photograph in the collection was unlike all the others. It was a self-portrait of Ezekiel Hayes taken with a timing mechanism of his own design. The image showed him standing amidst the bodies of the Holloway family, Cornelius's camera clutched in his hands. But his expression was not one of triumph. It was not satisfaction. It was sorrow. The face of a man who had carried out everything he had planned, only to discover that victory tasted like ashes in his mouth. Beneath the photograph, written in Hayes' precise hand, was a single line, both epitaph and explanation for that terrible night. Sometimes justice and tragedy are the same thing, separated only by the perspective of the observer. The mystery of Ravenshollow endures because it shows us that the tools of power can be turned against those who wield them. But transformation always comes at a cost. one that reaches far beyond the immediate victims. The line between justice and revenge, between documentation and exploitation, between art and atrocity, may be thinner than any of us want to believe. So what do you think? Did Ezekiel Hayes achieve justice, or did he simply become another kind of monster? Could there be other collections like these, buried away, waiting to be unearthed in forgotten corners of our history? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and the most insightful responses often find their way into future videos. If you found this journey into America's darkest photographic secrets as chilling as we did, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who understands that the most terrifying stories are often the ones that could actually be true. Until next time, remember, every old house has its secrets, every family its shadows, and sometimes the most important truths are the ones someone tried very hard to bury. Join us again as we uncover another mystery that proves the past is never really gone. It's only waiting for the right person to dig it up.
Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.